There's an aphorism attributed to the 19th century French writer Jean-Baptiste Alphonse Karr, which tells us the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think that's true. And I also think that's depressing as hell. I thought of that saying last week when I was watching the movie Quiz Show. It's not exactly a new movie, but I'd never seen it, and I decided to go back and finally cross that one off my to-watch list. If you've never seen it, I recommend it. It's very good. It's a dramatization of the quiz show scandal that changed the face of American television in the late 1950s. At the time the scandal broke, quiz shows, 21, Concentration, Tic-Tac-Doe, the $64,000 question, Name That Tune, and many, many more were among the most watched shows on American TV. The hosts and most successful contestants became major celebrities. That all ended when it was revealed to the public that some of the most popular quiz shows were rigged. Contestants had been secretly coached, in many instances just flat out given the answers to the questions they were asked on the show ahead of time. The producers of the shows did this under pressure from their sponsors to make the shows more dramatic, to ensure popular contestants would win and remain on the shows longer, and to attract larger audiences and make more money. The events of the quiz show scandal are presented in the film with utmost seriousness, as though they were of great importance. There's a scene late in the film where disgraced 21 champion Charles Van Doren delivers testimony to Congress about his role in the scandal that is presented with what I, watching, momentarily considered an absurd level of gravitas given the subject matter. I mean, sure, what these people did was dishonest, but they rigged some game shows. It wasn't good, it shouldn't be celebrated, but at the end of the day, what's the big deal? Then, another of the main characters, Dick Goodwin, the investigator who brought to light much of the evidence of the fixing of the quiz shows, is observing the testimony of Dan Enright, one of the producers of 21. Enright takes all the blame for rigging the results of his show himself, refusing to implicate either the sponsors of the show or the TV network. In frustrated disbelief, Goodwin mutters, "I thought we were going to get television, but the truth is, television is going to get us." That's the last tumbler clicking into place. That's the movie letting us know that the quiz show scandal isn't significant for its own sake. It's significant for what it represents. I imagine when director Robert Redford made Quiz Show, he thought of it as a commentary on how far media and culture had fallen in the decades since the scandal. But watching the movie now, 30 years after it was released, it also seems depressingly prescient. How can a movie be an observation of how bad things have gotten and a prediction of how bad things are going to get at the same time? Because the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's an earlier scene in Quiz Show where Herb Stempel, the disgruntled 21 contestant who eventually blows the whistle on the fixing of the show, is complaining about being told by the producers to take a dive on the next episode. As he fusses and grouches at his wife and son, the TV is on, and what's playing at that moment is a broadcast of professional wrestling. The film makes the connection between the quiz shows and wrestling explicit because I assume most people who watch the movie would think of it on their own eventually anyway. The parallel is obvious. Professional wrestling went from a more or less legitimate sport to a prearranged form of combat theater in much the same way that the quiz shows went from on the level to rigged, and for the exact same reason. Wrestlers and promoters found that if everyone cooperated to make the show as exciting and interesting as possible, they would draw a bigger audience and make a lot more money than they would by putting on a card of actual competitive wrestling matches. Why does that matter outside of wrestling or rigged 1950s quiz shows? There's another more modern aphorism I want to place alongside the more things change, the more they stay the same. You've probably heard it. It goes like this. Everything is wrestling. Now, that doesn't mean everything is fixed, worked, predetermined. It doesn't mean everyone is in on everything together. That's the paranoid conspiracy theorist viewpoint, and it's not what I'm advocating for here. What it means is the presentation of things is calculated to draw the biggest audience and make the most money. Now that Trump is president again and has declared open war on everything that displeases him, most especially the truth itself, you have to add that to the calculation too. And I'm not talking about game shows or wrestling. I'm talking about the news. This has been a problem since Quiz Show was playing in theaters in 1994. Since before that. If you're my age or older, you remember the constant coverage of the O.J. Simpson trial, the Menendez brothers trials, the Michael Jackson trial. You remember the coverage of the scandal involving President Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Hell, one of the main reasons Donald Trump was elected president at all, either time, was how he was covered by the mainstream media. His every incoherent word has been broadcast to the world, mostly without comment or correction, all day, every day, for 10 years now. Now that he's the president of the United States, again, a certain amount of media attention is expected, but back at the beginning, when he was just a buffoonish former reality show host running what most of us regarded as an embarrassing vanity campaign, what was the reason for him to be on TV so much? Was it because of a pressing national interest? Was it serving the public good? No. It was because people watched. I don't think mainstream news outlets are making up stories. That is something that can still trigger a genuine scandal. But are decisions being made as to which stories to cover, from what angles to cover those stories, who to talk to about those stories, and how much time to devote to covering those stories with drawing an audience as the primary goal? Absolutely. Newspapers and cable news channels don't use the same methods as wrestling promoters or the producers of rigged 1950s quiz shows, but they have the same motivation: to draw a bigger audience and make a lot more money. I don't know, I kind of think the main motivation of people who work in news should be reporting the news. They shouldn't concern themselves with ratings or profitability. They shouldn't have to. They should be able to cover the news that's relevant and important as accurately as possible, not as a form of entertainment, but as a public service. Whatever you're producing, a game show, a wrestling show, a reality show, a news broadcast, as soon as you choose to prioritize the entertainment value of the show, you've compromised with the truth. With game shows, wrestling, and reality shows, that's not usually a problem. In fact, as long as no one involved is lying to the public and saying the show is legitimate when it's actually not, I don't have a problem with that. If your job is to tell a story, telling the best story you can tell should be your priority. The producers of the movie Quiz Show knew that. Though it's based on true events and gets things mostly right, historically speaking, there's a lot of artistic license taken. Time spans are compressed, events are rearranged, characters' names, personalities, and significance are changed. That's okay. It's a movie. People understand. They're watching actors performing scripted scenes, not a newsreel. But when it is a newsreel, when you know people are watching because they believe what they're seeing is factual, when it needs to be factual so that the people watching can stay informed about what's happening in the world, then prioritizing entertainment and ratings and profit is a problem. That problem has existed for decades now, and if you want to see the result, just look around. The final shots of Quiz Show showing during the end credits are a series of slow-motion pans across a studio audience, a laughing, applauding, cheering studio audience. In the wake of the scandal, most quiz shows, even ones that weren't directly implicated in rigging their games, were canceled by the TV networks. But before that happened, they did what they were supposed to do. They drew an audience, and they made that audience very happy. How many of the people who watched those fixed quiz shows suspected they weren't on the level even before the scandal broke? How many of them kept watching anyway? Because they didn't care. Folks who aren't dedicated wrestling fans sometimes assume that, until relatively recently, most dedicated wrestling fans thought it was real, as in wrestling matches were actual athletic contests. But that's not true. Of course, there were always some who did, but most wrestling fans, even going back to the 1920s and 30s, knew what they were watching. I'm not saying they were smart to the business, knew all the behind-the-curtain ins and outs, but just the same way as you know you're not watching a stage magician actually saw someone in half, even if you don't know the exact mechanics of how the trick is done, wrestling audiences, by and large, have always known. The first exposés that revealed the true prearranged nature of wrestling matches were published in New York newspapers in the 1930s. Business suffered at first, especially in New York, but it came back after a while. It would be several more decades before wrestlers and promoters began openly admitting that what they did was show business, not a legitimate sport. During those decades, wrestling became more popular than ever before. In the 1950s, wrestling was as big an attraction on TV as the quiz shows. Did the public forget the truth? Or did they decide to pretend they'd never heard it because they just wanted to enjoy the show? The more things change,